that way. They think government is always the enemy, they're always right, and compromise is weakness. One of the main reasons we ought to re-elect President Obama is that he is still committed to constructive cooperation.
I'm Marcus Mabry, live here in Charlotte for the final day of the Democratic National Convention. President Obama will be here tonight accepting his party's nomination, but we're still talking about former President Bill Clinton's big speech from last night. Joining me now to talk more about it, White House correspondent Mark Landler. Mark, thanks for being here.
Good to see you, Marcus.
Now, Bill Clinton was widely received, not surprisingly, inside this hall last night. But that clip we played at the top of the show was a message sent to independent voters, kind of answering that question that the Republicans posed last week, allowing, really kind of Mitt Romney's argument, allowing independents and people who supported Obama last time permission to not support Obama this time. Will it have resonance outside the hall?
Well, I think one of the key targets for the president's speech was these independent voters who I think the former president was saying, you know, show a little patience. This is a guy who tried very hard to work with the other side, and more in sorrow than in anger, he kind of lamented the end of any bipartisan political culture. But at the same time, he said, look, President Obama designed his first campaign on being a post-partisan, a bipartisan figure. He invested hugely in it. It fell short in many respects, but he still has faith in him to carry that idea forward and to try to actually do business with the Republicans, which, as Bill Clinton pointed out when he was a young man, he wasn't brought up to hate Republicans. The whole notion of the two parties hating each other and each other's leaders is kind of a recent corrosive trend in politics.
It was interesting because Michelle Obama and then Bill Clinton seemed to kind of, you know, whatever metaphor you want to use, whatever cliche you want to use, set the table, lay up the ball. What do you talk to these people every day? What do Obama's advisors think that President Obama has to do tonight to close the deal? To use another metaphor.
Well, I think it's a couple of things. One, with this group of loyal but disenchanted and disappointed voters, people who may have supported him in 2008, but whom Mitt Romney has now officially given permission to change their votes, he needs to win those people back. And it's an appeal as much to patience as to the affection and idealism they had for him the first time. And then I think the second thing he needs to do is something he's done on the campaign trail, for the last several months, which is to really make stark the difference between himself, his vision, and the Republican vision, and to answer that fateful question the Republicans are asking Americans: are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? President Obama doesn't so much need to answer that definitively, but he needs to say to people, are you going to be better off in the next 4 years with a President Romney or a continuation of President Obama? He'll try to make the case affirmatively, you will be better off, particularly if you're middle class, if you vote for me.
And how specific does he have to be about exactly what he's going to do?
Well, President Clinton was plenty specific. Probably President Obama will not reach that level of granularity, but I think he's got to put some meat on the bones. I think he cannot afford a speech. One of the criticisms of Mitt Romney's speech was it was short on specifics. I think President Obama will try to be more concrete, particularly in lining up how his plans on tax policy, on health reform, on education compare to Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan's plans, and he will try to put meat on their plans, give you his view of why those plans are so bad for the middle class.
Another argument we expect the Democrats to be making a lot in the campaign going forward is one that has to do with voter suppression, as it's called. Let's take a listen to Bill Clinton on that topic last night.
If you want America, if you want every American to vote, and you think it is wrong to change voting procedures, just to reduce the turnout of younger, poorer, minority, and disabled voters, you should support Barack Obama.
Now, again, President Clinton was making that argument to this crowd of true believers in this hall. Is that going to resonate, number one, outside of this hall with independent voters? Will that make a difference, that argument about voter suppression? Number two, will it make a difference in actually who wins some crucial swing states?
Well, to the second question, it could. I mean, if the race is razor thin in places like Pennsylvania or Ohio, turning out voters who are traditional Democratic voters who might be underrepresented, it could be the whole ballgame. On the issue of does that appeal or is that argument attractive to independents, I think it goes to a question of fair-mindedness. I think people believe as an American principle that everyone is entitled to a vote. So to the extent that he makes an argument that simply sounds reasonable and fair, it could help be one more arrow in the quiver to be more appealing to these independent voters.
One thing I was a little surprised by last night, maybe I shouldn't have been, given his rhetorical skills, was Bill Clinton trying to answer that question as you posed about are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And despite bad unemployment numbers, etc., he said, yes, we are. Were you surprised that he asked and answered it that way?
I think there's only one answer to that question, particularly after a weekend where Democratic officials sort of couldn't get their story straight. Some said yes, some said no, some said maybe. So I think from now on, no one's going to answer that question on the Democratic side in the negative. I think, though, that, as I said earlier, I think that President Obama is going to really try to pitch the question forward more than dwell on what is in some ways an academic argument. And it's also a difficult argument. The argument he's made all along is, well, times have been tough, but if I hadn't taken the steps I had, they would have been catastrophically worse. Fine, but I think there's a limit.
Not a great argument.
There's a limit to how far that argument goes if you're someone who's worried about losing a job, if your mortgage is underwater. I think what you want to hear most is, okay, fine, we understand this was unprecedented, the recession we had was historic. We're willing to cut you some slack, but you have to make us believe that things are going to get better. And that goes to pitching the question forward, saying, here is my plan, here's what the other guy is offering, here is why you will be indisputably better off 4 years from now with my plan.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Mark, stay right there. We'll be coming back to you in a little bit. You're going to join us a little later on in our time together. In the meantime, though, we're going to go to a package looking at what some voters are saying elsewhere. So let's take a look at that.
In Washington, D.C., the photos of President Barack Obama are always the same. The poised perfection and buttoned-down symbolism of the commander-in-chief. But when Obama steps off Air Force One and lands in campaign country, he sheds the presidential straitjacket. He may still be surrounded by Secret Service agents, but it's all about the photo op, pressing the flesh, loosening his tie, and rolling up his sleeves.
It's not just a choice between two candidates or two political parties. It is a choice between two fundamentally different visions about where to take the country.
The president transforms into a different kind of political animal, candidate Obama.
My apologies. That was actually a piece by Luke Sherrod, one of our White House correspondents, comparing President Obama in the White House to President Obama on the campaign trail. Now we're going to toss over to our media center where my colleague Megan Lieberman is standing by with BuzzFeed's Washington bureau chief, John Stanton. Take it away, Megan.
Thanks, Marcus. So, John, this has been a very sort of well-reviewed convention in prime time. Seems like everything's gone pretty seamlessly, and there's been a pretty good energy around here, hasn't there?
There has been. It's a little different than Tampa, where, you know, in Tampa they set up these security perimeter, sort of multiple ones.
As we all know from having to pass through them, yeah.
Right, and you were blocks and blocks away from the city itself, and the city really went out of its way, I think, to get a lot of its citizens to stay home during the convention, and you felt like you were sort of in this military bubble almost, and I think that hurt the enthusiasm that you felt in the hall because, people walking in here, they got to walk past protesters, they got to walk past people hawking buttons and puppets and T-shirts and all kinds of stuff. And, there's people milling around, people are just coming to see what's going on, there's music being played, and they walk in and they sort of get this atmosphere, this excitement as they go in and they get in. And so I think, having it in the city and trying to integrate it a little bit more into the city has helped them keep up some of the energy.
That all said, there have been a few dust-ups that have happened mostly outside of prime time. You reported on one yesterday with the D.C. delegation. What happened there?
Well, since 1992, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's the D.C. representative, has been given a speaking slot at the conventions. And, she normally uses it to do a bit of a stem winder. She's a very good speaker, but she also uses it to push for D.C. statehood. It's the only part of the sort of continental United States that does not have a voting member of Congress. Congress can also interfere in the laws of the city and change its budget if it decides to. And it's been a very big deal. And until 2000, it was in the Democratic platform. And then in 2000, they pulled it out as part of this sort of effort to try to get some more home rule. And coming into this convention, there was an expectation she was going to speak, and
because she always does,
right? And they were going to try to get the statehood language in, and instead they never invited her. They've not given anyone a real reason as to why she's not being allowed to speak. They didn't allow the statehood language in, and in a sort of a classic metaphor for how far D.C. has fallen in the ranks of the states. They are the furthest you can get from the podium. Their stick that you see on television.
Sure.
Theirs is the furthest one away from the podium. And people like Wyoming, which is definitely not going to vote for Barack Obama, and has almost as few delegates as D.C., have a pretty nice little spot halfway down on the side. And Guam, and
it's pretty interesting because President Obama will get by far his largest margin in D.C. I mean, it's not even close.
No, it's Chocolate City, right?
Just taking him for granted.
Yeah.
There was some Twitter backlash to some of this too, right? Particularly from the former mayor.
Yes, His Honor, Mayor for Life, as we call him in Washington, Marion Barry. His real problem, I think, is with the statehood thing. I think where they're sitting, he's complained about it a little bit, but he sort of took after them in sort of classic Marion Barry fashion. Making these sort of claims of during slavery days, there were those that stayed on the plantation.
Were striking.
Right, and those are left, and the days of the D.C. plantation are almost over, right? And he's really been calling out the party very hard over the last probably 24 hours on Twitter and in person, and I think he's a dangerous guy to get on the wrong side of.
Rile him up,
no, and he always makes news at conventions, normally not the best news for him or anyone else involved, but, in this one, I think in D.C. people are really loving it, so.
There's obviously also been this imbroglio over the Jerusalem language in the platform, which was yanked and then reinstated yesterday. Your colleague Rosie Gray had a new little bit about that today. What would she have to say?
She had a good little story this morning. She talked to Chuck Schumer, and Senator Schumer said, "Look, the president's going to address this issue of Jerusalem and Israel more broadly in his acceptance speech today." And it's the thing that the dust-up happening over the language and over the God language, and the way they handled it yesterday, sort of ham-fistedly reinserting
the voice vote,
it,
which was
right?
Really not pretty.
No, it wasn't. And Republicans did a similar kind of thing with theirs, but this sort of hits. These two issues sort of hit at problems Democrats have. Particularly with conservative-minded voters in the Midwest, even if they're independents, that they're somehow maybe not, supportive of God or,
or Israel.
Or Israel, right? These are questions that people sometimes have in the Midwest, and it does hurt them. And I think, the fact that Obama has decided to address this thing in his acceptance speech is a pretty important move, And I think, Schumer, I think, was smart to go out and telegraph that this morning. They don't like to talk about what he's going to say, but getting it out there now to try to kill the controversy so that before he says it, it's no longer the thing anyone's talking about was probably a smart idea.
The final thing that I wanted to talk about was there are these tens of thousands of people who came in, many of them spending a lot of their own money to fly in to see the president speak tonight. Mm-hmm. That was when it was going to be in a big stadium. Now it's not. And those people are all going to get locked out. So what's happening for those people, and have you talked to any of them? How do they feel about all of this?
Yeah, well, we've talked to a few of them, and they just, a few minutes ago, I guess, finished up a conference call with the president. I don't know how you get the
65,000 people on
a conference call. But they finished this thing where I guess he apologized, and, they sort of said, we're sorry, but they're not getting, conciliatory mug or T-shirt. And, a lot of people flew and spent a lot of money, but there are also a lot of people, we talked to one person who, she drove down here from Atlanta. She'd had to drive to go get her tickets in Atlanta, and then she drove here from Atlanta. She was staying, and, she stayed last night in a very, sort of horrible hotel that's dirty and in a bad part of town, and she did all this to come and see the president and to see see him accept the nomination. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with these people, because a lot of them were people that they were hoping they could then turn into sort of on the ground volunteers in places like Virginia and North Carolina, and they need them if they're going to try to take one of those two states. And now it's unclear,
how excited those people are going to be to work for them.
And they're now talking there may be 10,000 people standing outside of the gates surrounding the center here where they're holding it, expecting to be able to get in, because either they don't know that they can't get in, or because they figure, well, if I have the ticket, I can get in over there, because they didn't know about the conference call. So it's a bit of a mess for them right now.
Thanks a lot, John.
Sure.
Okay, that's all for me. Back to you, Marcus.
Thanks, Megan. I'm joined now by White House correspondent Peter Baker, who has a big story today in the paper looking at President Obama personally, something we at the Times sometimes call a man in the news piece. Thanks for being here, Peter.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, tell us, if you're working in the New York Times, what does it mean, man in the news? What's that about?
It's really a storied tradition in the history of the Times in which on big occasions like a nominating convention or an election or something like that, which we step back and try to look at the person we're focused so much about, not just his policies or the political arguments, but him as a person, as an individual in an extraordinary role. In this case, we have an incumbent president, somebody everybody has known now pretty well for 4 years and longer, and trying to find a way of capturing what's changed in these 4 years he's been in office.
What has he learned, do you think?
Right, it's a good question. And I think he's learned a number of things. He's learned that some of his initial idealism, if you want to call it that, naivete, some people might call, was probably a little unfounded. The ability to make Washington work in the way he thought he would be able to work hasn't turned out. I think he came into office with this what I sort of call the reasonable man theory of government, the reasonable person theory of government, in which if he simply could sit down with people like the Iranians or the Republicans or the Israelis and the Palestinians, that by simple force of personality and rationality, we ought to be able to solve these problems. And it sounds really great, right, when we talk about that. And in fact, politics, both international and domestic, don't turn out to be quite as rational as he thought.
Have we changed as a country? Has Washington changed? Was that easier to do before, which is kind of Bill Clinton's intimation last night? It was easier to do that before. In the old days, the Democratic leader and the Republican leader in the House would go out and, after doing battle on the floor of the House, would then go out and have a drink together.
Right.
Apparently Washington's changed.
There's a real nostalgia for these old days, and some of that has fuzzed over a lot of the reality. I mean, I think it probably is tougher these days. I think there is more polarization these days. But Bill Clinton last night talked about how he is stunned by how much Republicans hate Democrats these days. It seems to me during his presidency there was a whole lot of hate going around, and it kind of went both.
Impeachment.
Don't forget impeachment. And it went both ways, by the way. The Republicans hated Bill Clinton. Democrats hated Newt Gingrich. This is not exactly a kumbaya presidency either. So what we're seeing, I think, today is an evolution rather than a sudden change in the atmosphere of Washington.
One of President Obama's answers when people, both, I guess mostly critics, but even people in the media, have asked, what mistakes have you made? What regrets do you have? He answered kind of like George W. Bush answered, with great criticism afterwards. Well, nothing I can think of, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's not quite.
What he tends to say is it's communication. I haven't told the story well. And what he means by that, of course, and this is the question of all politicians who are in trouble, is if you only understood what I'm doing better, of course you would support me.
Right.
And in fact, as
that sounds like an arrogant argument. But
well, the question is whether you're deceiving yourself or not. Is it really communication, or is in fact there's some substantive issues there involved? And that's something that he'll have to figure out for himself, and voters will figure out in November. But Robert Gibbs, who was the press secretary in the White House during the first couple of years of Obama's White House, told me once. I remember he says, "I've never been to a policy problem meeting." It's easy to say it's the communications when these things go wrong.
Right. Sure. Well, tell us more about this idea that one of the reasons the president's going to argue that he didn't get more of his agenda done, do more for America, more for the middle class, was Republican intransigence. If voters ask, well, what's going to change if we send you back to Washington, and the Republicans right now control the House, could in fact, a hair's breadth away from controlling the Senate, depending what happens in November. why wouldn't voters say, well, why would we not expect gridlock again? Is that an argument for Mitt Romney?
No, it's a very good question. And in fact, there is an argument to say maybe government should be all in one party's control so you can hold them accountable one way or the other. And obviously that argument that some Democrats are making obviously lets President Obama and Democrats off the hook for any role they might have in some of the polarization. Obviously, it's a two-way street in a lot of these cases. But he has expressed this optimism that something will change after the election. Should he be reelected, he says he thinks the fever will break, the fever of what he calls partisanship. And he thinks, or at least expresses the hope, that once he's no longer going to be running for office again, he has no future elections ahead of him, there will be less interest on the other side in opposing him, staying away from him, obstructing him in his view, and that somehow they can be able to get things done. That may be an example of optimism, triumphing over experience, but maybe if you're going to run for a second term, you sort of have to believe that.
Excellent. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to toss now to the media center where Carl Holst is standing by with Congressman Steve Israel, head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Take it away, Carl.
Thanks, Marcus. Well, as Bill Clinton would say, Congressman, it's arithmetic. You need 25 seats to Democrats to pick up to win the House back. Can you do it?
Yeah, absolutely we can do it. It's in range. And here's how we do it. We need 25 seats to take the majority. Right now, there are 66 districts across America that have a Republican incumbent, but voted for President Obama in 2008 or John Kerry in 2004. These are Obama-Kerry Democratic districts with a Republican incumbent, so we start there. That's 66. We've since expanded the playing field another 10 to 15 races because of ethically challenged Republicans or particular dynamics in districts. Bottom line, right now, 75 seats in play. We need 25. It is in range.
Do you think you'll do it?
Look, I'll tell you what. We have the ball on their 20-yard line. Mm-hmm. We started with the ball on our 20-yard line 2 years ago. No path to the goal, no view of the goal. We got it to their 20-yard line. We've exceeded every expectation. When you have the ball on your opponent's 20-yard line, a lot of it has to do with the wind. Mm-hmm. If you have a wind at your back, you're going to score. You have a wind at your face, you're not. And if it's a neutral environment, who knows?
But you don't want to settle for a field goal.
Well, I want to settle for 25 seats. We have a wind at our back right now, and I'll give you some empirical data. In August, I thought it was pretty tough. We left Washington in August. The generic polling was pretty neutral. And the polls that were coming back from districts across the country were fairly static. Since then, as a result of the Ryan budget and the Ryan nomination, Congressman Aiken's outrageous statements, and the frolicking in the Sea of Galilee.
Member, so it's representative.
That's exactly right. It's created a toxic environment for House Republicans, and as a result, the generic we were only 1 point ahead in early August. We're now 5 points ahead in early September.
Which the generic has been traditionally a good indicator.
Critical indicator. If we can get that generic we got it from 1 to 5 in 1 month. Mm-hmm. If we can get it to between 6 and 8, we win the House back.
So we're seeing some evidence at the presidential race that the Medicare fight is muddled, maybe not a huge issue for the president. But you're saying at the House level, because they all voted for that budget, that it's more of a cutting issue.
Exactly. A lot of the pundits are saying, well, the Republicans have neutralized it. Maybe they neutralized it on the presidential level, although after listening to President Clinton last night, I think he has deneutralized it. But at the House level, we have these incumbents who put their voting cards in and voted yes to end the guaranteed Medicare benefit in order to fund tax cuts for a millionaire. It's on the record. They can't escape the record. So every incumbent around the country, every Republican incumbent, is running with the Paul Ryan budget to end Medicare around them.
Is the president hurting your incumbents? Is he a drag on them in some parts of the country, President Obama?
No, he's not a drag and he's not hurting, but there's no question that we've got 19 incumbents who historically have uphill districts. Most of them, in fact, all of them won in 2010. If they can win in 2010, I think they're going to win in 2012. It's a much more hospitable environment. They've got steeper terrain, but they know what they're doing. They're battle-tested, field-ready. Every single one of our 19 frontline incumbents is polling very well. In fact, most of them are over 50%, in the low to mid-50s.
Right, which is usually the barometer. Right?
That's the barometer. Most of the new Republican incumbents who are hanging on to their seats are polling in the low to mid-40s.
Okay, can you say how many Republican freshmen you think you can knock out?
I can't tell you how many today we're going to knock out. I can tell you that we've got 60.
There were a lot of them, as you remember.
Yeah. Well, we've got 66 Kerry Obama districts. That's where we start. No matter what happens, the math has to end up where we protect our 19 frontline incumbents, and we go ahead and we take out enough Republicans to get us to 25, and I think it's absolutely in range.
Besides Medicare, what other issues do you think are really important in these campaigns? Or is it by district by district?
You know, it's really district by district. One way to lose an election is for the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee to tell candidates in their specific districts what works. But the overall framing is about priorities. Medicare by itself may or may not win an election. But Medicare, when you hinge it to millionaires, that is resonant. So a candidate who just says, they want to eliminate Medicare, it's muddled. But if you say, look, they're saying we can't afford Medicare, but they're saying we can afford tax cuts for millionaires, that works. It's impactful, and it's changing the dynamic of these elections.
Thanks for coming in. You're going to be working hard the next 2 months.
Love the hard work.
Back to you, Marcus.
Thanks so much, Carl. I'm joined once more by Mark Landler, White House correspondent. Mark, good to see you again.
Hello again, Marcus.
Now, what about that argument? The Democrats think that they can hang the Paul Ryan budget around the necks of Republican incumbents running for Congress.
Well, I mean, the Democrats have a lot riding on this. In fact, even before Paul Ryan was on the Romney-Ryan ticket, the hope had been to somehow make the words Romney and Ryan synonymous in the minds of voters. And you do see some concern on the part of Republicans in some of these House races who don't want to be identified with perhaps, a dismantling of Medicare or deep cuts in some popular discretionary government programs. And so you're already beginning to see some people out in their constituency say, well, I don't believe in absolutely every detail of the Ryan budget. Even Mitt Romney himself, in the day or two after he announced Paul Ryan as his running mate, was careful to draw a slight nuance between how he might approach some budget issues and what was in the Ryan budget, because the Ryan budget, as the Democrats will never tire of telling you, has these very draconian across-the-board cuts. And so they would love to hang it around the necks of every single person running for office who's a Republican.
To bring it back to what we can expect to hear from President Obama in this hall tonight, what are you looking for? Do you think that'll be a topic he might address?
I think it probably will be a topic he addresses. How explicit he is, we'll have to see. I guess I'm looking for a couple of things on the level of content and then on the level of tone. On content, I'm wondering how squarely he will try to answer that question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And if so, how much meat he'll put on the bone in explaining his program and how it differs from the Republican program. And then secondly, on a tone level, the Democratic convention speech of 2008 was a memorable moment in the campaign. The venue was extraordinary, the tone, the soaring rhetoric. It was one of the speeches that really established him in the pantheon of
columns,
great political speakers. I guess pantheon, my mind went there immediately. Can he hit that kind of a note tonight? Given the different feeling this year, given the disenchantment, the fact that the what Republicans call the hopey, changey moment is gone, or will he try to swing for the fences in a different way than Bill Clinton did last night? Will he try to reclaim some of that soaring oratory that characterized the 2008 campaign?
Is there a danger of coming after Bill Clinton, who is so great at, even when he's being wonky and talking about numbers, so great at connecting emotionally with an audience? Is there a danger that Professor Obama will come off sounding professorial?
Well, I think that in a speech like this, he's very alert to that potential, and I think he won't try to do what Bill Clinton did. He's never going to try the drawly approach, that sort of loose, freewheeling approach. That's not who he is. He has this ability to be at once serious and somewhat removed, but make people feel just a great deal of excitement and idealism behind the message. And I think if he can do that, he can have the third powerful speech of the campaign of this convention, if you accept that Michelle Obama on the first night was the first blockbuster speaker, and then Bill Clinton last night. It's a high bar. It won't be easy for him to be quite as dazzling as Bill Clinton, but he has it in him. So we'll have to wait and see whether he pulls it off.
The day after, 12 hours after he speaks, there will be less than 12 hours after he speaks, there'll be a jobs number report coming out. what's the potential of that to squash whatever the Democrats accomplish in the 3 nights here?
Well, if it's a bad number, the potential is substantial. I mean, the Republicans have been able to jump on one job number after another to say, look, this isn't working. These numbers are dreadful. The economy's stalled. You haven't done what you needed to get us out of the ditch. It's interesting in the markets today, and we should immediately caution that the markets are capable of being spectacularly wrong. There have been a couple of early indications that the number could be, if not great, then at least decent. And the stock market, in fact, was trading up this morning on hopes that the number might be a good number. A good number these days is defined as anywhere from 150 to 200,000 new jobs. If they hit a number like that, it doesn't necessarily throw a great deal of wind into the sails, because I think most Americans have kind of adjusted to a slow recovery, but it wouldn't be a downside surprise, and I think it would deprive the Republicans of an easy way to step quickly on the euphoria of this convention, and it would set President Obama on a good track as he goes to Florida. He's going to go off and do a 2-day bus tour through Florida. It would give him something to talk about, if not to promote, then just to say, look, people, it's been tough, but things are moving slowly in the right direction.
All right, we'll be standing by. Thanks so much for being here with me, Mark.
Happy to do it.
Now, that's all for me for now, and my opinion colleagues will take over with op-ed columnist Charles Blow standing by in the Media Center. I'll be back here live at 7 p.m. with much more. I'm Marcus Mabry. Thanks for watching the New York Times.
Hi everyone, I'm Charles Blow, and I'm joined by my fellow columnist Ross Douthat. So Ross, what did you think of Clinton's speech last night?
I think that, you look back at the Republican convention in Tampa, and the Republicans made a clear decision. They were going to sell Mitt Romney, the human being, and talk very little about public policy. And that left the kind of opening that Bill Clinton just lives for. And so his speech, it was, I think, just as good as everybody says it was, but it was good precisely because it hit that vulnerability. It was, a sort of, it had elements of an old-fashioned Clinton State of the Union, sort of a policy laundry list.
Right.
But instead of a laundry list...
It's kind of wonky, actually. It was a lot of numbers.
He spent a lot of time sort of in disentangling different issues, talking about Medicaid, talking about student loans, and the overall effect was to define the Republicans after the Republicans had declined to define themselves.
So what effect do you think that has?
I mean, overall, my sense has been that it's been very hard to move the numbers in any way in this election. So I'll be surprised if the speech or this convention in general gives Obama a big boost. But I think it helps him. I think that the story of this race is that, the Democratic ticket needs to make Americans fear the prospect of a Romney presidency. And I think Bill Clinton did that fairly well last night.
Is the goal simply to move the numbers, or is it to close an enthusiasm gap if one exists, and to stiffen the spines of loyalists who might then go out and knock on doors?
No, it's both, clearly. And in that sense, I think both nights of this convention have been very effective. I mean, the things that I, as a conservative, have found somewhat off-putting about the sort of pre-Michelle Obama and pre-Bill Clinton portions have been clearly pitched to exactly that constituency, sort of mobilizing key groups and so on. And then I think, you walk around this convention, liberals are more excited, I think, about their ticket, clearly, than Republicans were excited about Mitt Romney in Tampa.
And do you think, how does it compare to the Republican convention in the sense of, were they successful in rallying their base?
They were up to a point, but in the end, the Republican base just doesn't have the feeling for Mitt Romney that Democrats have for Barack Obama. Democrats feel about Obama the way Republicans felt about Reagan. And even though Obama isn't as popular in the country as a whole as Reagan was in '84, within the Democratic Party, that passion is there. With the Republican convention, the Republicans have a lot of future stars, a lot of rising politicians, the Christies, the Ryans, the Rubios, Susana Martinez, who delegates like, who Republican voters like. And the Democratic Party has fewer of those, but the Democratic Party has the headliners. The Michelle, Bill, Barack show, and that show has been a success.
Okay, so let's move to the Barack show. What does Barack Obama need to say tonight, or what space is left After Michelle's speech, after Bill's speech, what is the space left, and how does he need to fill it?
Well, the leaks that they're putting out as we speak now are that he's going to talk about entitlement reform, right? And that would fill a gap in a sense.
Do you believe that?
I'm sure that he will mention entitlements. I will be very surprised if he talks substantively or, wonkishly about entitlements, because I think that that's not the argument that they've been planning to use to close the deal. And I think that it's more a case of, before Romney's convention speech, Paul Ryan said he'll talk in granular detail, and of course he didn't. So I think that that's more spin than reality. I'm not looking for a big affirmative second-term agenda from Obama tonight because, frankly, I don't think he has one.
And even what is the balance, though, between inspirational speech and policy-oriented, plan-oriented speech for a candidate in a convention?
I mean, I think in general, pundits actually tend to underestimate how much voters want to hear about policy. I think this is one of the secrets of Bill Clinton's success, and he's obviously uniquely gifted.
But that's also not the candidate, right?
It's not the candidate.
There are people who can carry that water.
There are people, but Obama's not terrible talking about policy. He's not Clinton, but I think it would be a huge mistake, and I think that they've sort of avoided this a bit by moving the speech inside to try and recapture the kind of soaring, stadium-filling language of 2008. I think this is a speech that to work, it does have to actually be pitched to swing voters. And I think the pitch to swing voters can't be, fall in love with Barack Obama all over again. It does have to be, a sort of more workmanlike, times are getting better.
So you're saying two different things, Rick. You're saying he needs to pitch to swing voters, but we're not seeing the needle move. So he needs to pitch to them, although we don't expect that to be right.
No, what I'm saying is I think this will be a very close election down to the wire.
Okay.
But I don't think either side can actually win just on base turnout. I think, look, the number of swing voters has shrunk, right? It's 4 to 5% of the electorate. But that's still the group that, will probably tip the balance one way or another. So yes, it's more important than ever to mobilize your base. Yes, you shouldn't expect to move the needle dramatically, but even a 1 to 2 point swing. I mean, since the Ryan pick, Romney got a very small sort of 1 to 2 point shift steadily in the polls, and that mattered, and that brought him into sort of parity with Obama. And now there's one of them is going to get a 1 to 2 point shift between now and November, because one of them has to win.
One more, exactly.
I think.
or unless it be 2000.
And that is actually a very live possibility that we could have 2000 in reverse.
Exactly.
That Obama could win the Electoral College and lose the popular vote.
Let me give you another balancing question. How much does this speech have to be targeted towards swing state voters, which is a very specific kind of voter, and how much needs to be about the country and bringing everybody to the table?
This maybe sounds like a cynical read, but I think it needs to be more narrowly targeted. I think the Obama who spends a lot of time sort of, I'll say, bragging, you might say, talking seriously about his own commitment to bipartisanship, I don't think that that's exactly the play he wants to make here. I think he wants to he needs to defend his record, obviously.
And they've been doing that.
They've been doing that, and he needs to say that that the Republicans would be worse on very specific fronts, on spending, entitlements, and so on.
Do you think he does what a lot of the other speakers have done, which is to go directly at kind of social issues and bringing those up to the front? You don't think he does that?
I think that there will be a line about a woman's right to choose and so on. There will be some, very generic talk about women's rights. But if he gets up there and channels Sandra Fluke, then the White House is much, much crazier than I think they are. I think Democrats consistently overestimate how well the abortion issue in particular plays with swing voters, but I don't think they overestimated enough to put it front and center in the acceptance speech tonight.
That's all the time we have. If you were playing the drinking game and waiting for Ross Douthat to say abortion, he said it. You can take a shot now. That's all for now. We'll all be back this evening with the final night of the convention, including President Obama's big speech. See you then. I'm Charles Blow. Thanks for watching.